The following is a conversation with Stephen Raitz, a law student at the University of Alberta, the representative of the undergraduate students at the Board of Governors, and an enthusiast in city planning done right. We talked about the intricacies of urban planning, the pressing issues of housing affordability in Edmonton, and the challenges and opportunities of a student representation at the governance level. Conversations about the blending legal insights with urban development and student advocacy are quite niche, and they require a deep understanding of the policies, a keen awareness of the community needs, and a strategic approach to problem solving. Traits that I personally don't think anyone on the University of Alberta's campus or campuses in general knows better than Stephen. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. To support this podcast, simply hit the follow button on Spotify or Apple Podcast, or subscribe to the YouTube channel where you can find each episode in video format, sneak into behind the scenes, find important snippets of each episode, and much more. And if you're feeling super generous today, feel free to follow the Patreon page of the podcast. I would greatly appreciate your support. Now, dear friends, this is Amirali Bigleri Podcast, and here's my conversation with Stephen Raitz. Okay, you are a student at the Faculty of Law at UofA.
Yeah.
And you're graduating. How are you feeling?
I am feeling good. I feel like I've done everything humanly possible at the University of Alberta, basically. So I'm kind of like, yeah, work's done here. Time to move on. And really thankful for all the good times that have led up to this conclusion.
Why law?
For me, I worked as a planner prior to coming to law school, and at the end of my urban planning degree, so like all about built form, land development, that kind of stuff, city building, there was a little bit of me that was interested in law school. I was like, maybe I should go to law school. Just as I was completing that degree, I had a bunch of friends in poli-sci who were like thinking of doing that, and I really enjoyed, the conversations that I'd have with them and like the debates that we would have, and I'm like, maybe there's something there for me. But I was like, I should work for a bit first, and so I worked for a city just outside of Edmonton called Beaumont in like an internship program. So I got to touch a lot of different work because it was like internship focused on giving you experience. Mm-hmm. And I found that I loved a lot of it. Really enjoyed engagement, writing policy, like doing all this different kind of work. But the stuff that like really got me the most interested, and like me probably the most uniquely interested compared to other planners, like the stuff that got me going the most compared to everything else was that like legal aspect, like the law that underlaid like everything that happens when we build stuff, and the law that underlays everything in a community. Like that was just super fascinating to me, and I was like, I should do that because I think it's interesting and no one else thinks it's interesting. So I think I can make it interesting to everybody else. And yeah, going through law school, like a lot of the time people might come in and they're like, I want to be a criminal defense lawyer, or like, I want to be a big corporate CEO or something. And they kind of come to a realization through law school that they're like, I don't exactly know what I'm into, but now I'm going to go practice law and figure it out. And I found everything through law school has kind of confirmed the path that I think I want to go on, which is like, yeah, being involved with like planning, municipal law, like how does stuff get built in communities, like what are the rules of our communities at the very local level. That's what's interesting to me.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. We'll get into the types of advocacy that you do and mm-hmm. you've done throughout your degree, which is quite a handful of stuff. But I wonder, I'm always curious about this. The thing about law and rules is that they take a long time to get accepted and approved. And if they have a problem, they also get a long time to get changed and updated. So it's really hard for a person who is motivated, maybe not hard, but just challenging to keep up the motivation. So how do you portray that?
How do I like think about that?
Yes.
Or like
mm-hmm.
how do I consider that in my work?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think like the interesting thing about law in what you're saying is like it takes a while to push for change within it, because it's ultimately the system of rules that binds everyone. Like we all need to in some way agree to this, or like at least respect the process of like lawmaking, and for everybody to at least have some kind of like involvement or to have like support for the process that creates laws. It just takes a lot of like time to like engage and reflect different perspectives and understand like different implications of rules, because a rule applies in one scenario, but it also needs to apply in like a million other scenarios or across a million other people. So yeah, it's really complicated because you need to consider so many things. And so I guess how it impacts like what I do or like how I perceive like community building or like advocacy, you start from that place of universality. If you want to speed things up a little bit, like if you're like, oh, we already all agree to this idea that we might want to like change in how our community or society works, then I think you don't have to go through as much of the arduous like, well, have you thought of this, have you thought of that, because you've already started from that point of like, no, we can all agree to this idea. I think like I really try to live that in a lot of my advocacy and like work outside of school and like outside of, you know, employment. Because yeah, I think it just makes it easier to bring people in the process and then move through that process more easily. But you got to also respect the fact that like laws also impact everybody. Like they should impact everybody
Yes.
in like a good society. And so that's part of like the power of law, is that it's supposed to shape everybody. It's the rules we all agree to. And so that's what makes it really powerful. So you have to respect that as well and just understand that it's going to take time to sort this stuff out because it literally impacts everybody.
I understand. Okay. All right, let's get into some specific advocacies you've done. You're an enthusiast of urban planning, and your views are more specific toward that field. So could you please give me an intro of the outlook of a person who comes from a law background into urban planning and how we can make changes?
Well, I guess connecting those two fields of like urban planning and law, like you see how the law is so foundational to a lot of the more flowery or fun things that can happen through urban planning processes. So that foundation is like fundamental and doing everything on top of it. And it's also like can be very constricting in some ways too, because if the foundation only lets you do X, Y, Z, how are you supposed to do A, B, C? So you have to rethink the foundation, which is the law, that foundation of urban planning, to get to ABC if it's not currently possible. So I think like that's part of the mindset, is like recognizing how fundamental it is to build off of. And then I also think there's like the process aspects of urban planning, like the community engagement, the like developing buy-in for a new idea, or you know, developing support for a particular project. Like a lot of that is argumentation and like advocacy, which is what, you know, you're taught to do in law school, of like how do you advocate for ideas or push for certain stances or perspectives. And so a lot of that, like the day-to-day stuff that happens in planning, the negotiation and the kind of like working through the process with a bunch of people who might have different perspectives, you know, a lot of the skills that you pull from law get applied there. So I think, yeah, there's definitely that angle of it too. So there's like that foundational angle, and then also like the day-to-day angle of like what I take from law and apply to urban planning.
What is it specific about Edmonton that you have to use both your degree in law and, of course, the skills you have to have for urban planning to make changes that are specific to Edmonton? Because it's a very niche career path, and at the same time it's something that is very specific to that location. So if you're let's say if you're an urban planner in Nunavut, you're gonna have a hard time in Los Angeles. So what's the process of building up on your skills and just finding a place where your skills can suit the environment the most?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think like the first consideration that comes to mind is definitely from that urban planning side of just like context. Like what is the actual like built form? What is the shape and design of the city? And Edmonton, I think, has some really unique challenges in that regard, because it's a city that's grown really explosively at times. It's a city that's not really restricted by geography or resource allocation. Like it's a lot like a lot of other North American cities in that it is quite sprawling. but I think it has some unique factors of like, yeah, there's no geographic restrictions. There's no real, at least in the short to medium term, no restrictions on like resources like water and that kind of thing. And also, I think, it being a Western Canadian city, a Northern North American city, it's kind of like on the outskirts of a lot of stuff. And so I think the community of people that live within that city also, develops a bit of a unique culture of like, of togetherness because we're very far out there compared to like all the other cities distributed across North America. So, that's the context that informs like, okay, how does that city look in the first place? Like that city is quite sprawling. That city is quite car dependent, like a lot of other North American cities. But then there's also the aspect of how does that city feel? Like what kinds of communities exist within that city? And so I think there's a lot of I think there's just kind of like a natural sort of, at least most of the time, positive mindset here. Or if people are complaining about things, there's a basket of other people who are like, well, you're just being a complainer. Like, that's the way things are. Like, we can work to make things better. Like, there's just sort of a positive sort of trajectory into how people, like, live within their city and want to see their city, like, grow and improve that exists here. And because we're, like, more isolated on the continent, I guess, like, it's just, like, I think people buy into here more because there's less places to go to that are nearby. Like people are like happy to be nearby. So there's all that context stuff of like the people and the land. And so that informs like, yeah, what's the shape of the legal framework that's gonna like, yeah, structure that society and structure how that community looks. And so I think from the people sides, there's, like some positive energy, some positive momentum, and like, yeah, we can be open to changing the rules. Like we just did a really fundamental rewrite of our zoning bylaw that it does a lot of the stuff that now, as house prices in Canada are kind of going crazy in some places, these other big cities are needing to do what we've already done. So we're kind of ahead of the curve in that way. And then from the built form context, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of work to do. We're like quite sprawling, and so the legal framework needs to like reflect that there's a lot of change that's still going to occur and take time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you mentioned. Okay, a lot of questions now. You mentioned that there are not a lot of restrictions regarding the environment for the city of Edmonton. Could we dig deeper into how? Okay, any city has a specific culture. You have an idea of how it's supposed to look like, but it also should have a future and how the future would look like, and hopefully it will be something quite different with added benefits and improved technologies, hopefully. So something like green transportation and sustainable construction, for example. So how is the process of implementing those changes in a city that is quite conservative, let's say? In an environment that is quite conservative. So there is an emphasis on more traditional resource allocations like oil. Am I making this too political?
No, you're not making it too political. I think I kind of disagree with the framing of like Edmonton is a more conservative city. Yes. Like I think like part of what like the culture here is that there is kind of this inherent progressiveness to it that I think comes from like, when like you always got to acknowledge and like looking back into the history of a place, like there's a very long standing history that goes beyond like the development of Edmonton, like starting at the end of the 19th century, that I think impacts like Edmonton had always been a place of gathering for like First Nations and Inuit and Métis people, like those communities that existed on the continent. Like Edmonton has been like the River Valley has been a gathering place for a very long time. So there's kind of communitarian threads flowing through that. And then, the actual development of Edmonton and areas around Edmonton, there's a lot of like ethnic communities like Ukrainians, like French, Swedish people, German people, like all kind of existed around and within Edmonton. And so there's a lot of those like sub-communities supporting one another and supporting different communities that I think like builds up more of this progressiveness. So I've just basically refuted. I'm refuting your point around like it being conservative.
No, I like it.
Yeah, but like how that kind of culture impacts like where we're going. I guess.
No, my question was how would the process of providing the change be in a way that suits. Um, okay, having a change that suits the community is different than making sure that the community is supporting the change. Does that make sense? So
Mm.
what's the process of communicating that change?
Yeah.
Especially when cities like, okay, cities that already have industries like oil,
Mhm.
it's a little bit challenging to um, move them from this comfortable place of, okay, we have this resource right now, we can just use it and just think more about the future. So
Mhm.
how would the process of communicating that be?
Yeah, I think I'm really interested in that framing of like the like we're gonna build a community in the way that will support the community, but you also need the community to support the way in which we are gonna build the community, and so like sometimes there's tension there, and I think like part of pulling apart that tension or diffusing that tension is like making sure that you're pulling the community along through the process. Like you're not just like, here's the outcome we're working towards. It's been decided by science and law, and like now we're going to go forward. Like you never do that. You always bring people along through the process, and through bringing people along through the process, like from the beginning of like developing the vision, like setting the goals, like figuring out the initiatives, strategies, bylaws, all that stuff. You're also like listening to them and seeing how some of those bigger ideas that we might want, like a community where it's easier to walk or roll around, or a community that relies less on like automobile transportation, how those big overarching goals can still like connect to people. And I think like the city's done a very good job of that in like the past decade, of establishing a planning direction that is like, here's the outcome we're going to work towards, but ensure it still like reflects what people would like to see in their community, which is
Mhm.
just ultimately like more stuff closer to home. You know, trying to build housing that can be more affordable for more Edmontonians. You know, having fun things in your community, like that. That's what it's all about, and it's not scary stuff. And so you always gotta play defense against some of that scary stuff that's always accompanies the idea of change,
Yeah.
of like, oh, I don't want things to be different, but it's like, no, we want things to be better. And so that means we can retain the stuff that we do like the idea of like knowing your neighbors, or the idea of having really nice big trees along our streets.
Mhm.
And you can then marry the stuff that we love to the stuff that we need and deserve. So like the more things in our communities, the more transportation options, all of that stuff can work together towards that goal. So it's like, yeah, you never want to really be put in a scenario where it's like, oh, the outcome's been determined. How do you bring the people along for that? It should be through the whole process. The people are being brought along for that like vision development, goal development, yada yada yada. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mhm.
Can we linger on green transportation a little bit more?
Oh yeah. Well, and that like I could just dive into it if we're good.
Go ahead.
I think like that has been like a really big part of like my young adulthood, has been like advocating for stuff like bike lanes, like shared use paths, like better sidewalks, like all that stuff.
You
Like
want to make it Netherlands out of Edmonton?
it's not even like make the Netherlands out of Edmonton. It's just like make sure that like a kid can bike to school,
Yeah.
or like
Mhm.
make sure that I can bike where I want to bike, and somebody can roll where they want to roll safely. Um, and so it's always been so interesting though, because like Edmonton's built in a way where it's like, yeah, Edmonton is not the Netherlands. Edmonton is very different. Edmonton is sprawling. Edmonton people have to drive, like yada yada yada. And so everything of trying to, maybe at least create the opportunity for people in Edmonton to bike around, means divorcing ourselves from like the Edmonton that we kind of know as it exists. But it's just been such fun advocacy, because it's so different from what we know and what we experience day to day. Because it like sometimes it really sucks to walk around Edmonton. Sometimes it really sucks to bike around Edmonton. You really got to bring people along for that journey
Mhm.
to like keep the buy-in for it and like the political support. So you've always got to be like careful of like, yeah, it's not necessarily going to be bike lanes everywhere, because like I literally believe that would not make sense. That would not make sense in a lot of Edmonton. It's going to be bike lanes some places, but it's going to be shared use paths in a lot of places. It's just going to be better crosswalks in a lot of places. So like just the communications challenge of like pushing for a different transportation system when people are used to things working a certain way, is really fun, because it's like it really gets you to massage the message so that it ultimately reflects what we're going to build to, and it also ensures that we like bring people along for the ride too. Yeah.
And it's also just like fun. Like people, like most people like to have a nice little walk or roll around their community. Like it's not like yeah, if we were like, I don't know, I can't think of an example right now, but it's just like people enjoy that kind of thing. So you have some of those natural hooks, and so then you just got to bring people along and communicate in a way where it's like, and it's going to work here. We can do this here. We're going to get that thing that we love and we deserve here. We just got to make sure we do it right. Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this from my friends. I really like Edmonton, even in the winter. I mean, I have to keep up with it at some point, but I like it overall in general. I just wish there was a way I could bike in the winter. And
Yeah.
it's not, I don't think it's really facilitated. So what do you think the city can improve on so we can hopefully manage that manage that happen a little bit easier maybe?
Yeah, I think like the city's doing a lot of the right stuff right now, and it's just like continuing to build out the capacity, that network, like making the option more available for more folks. Because like, yeah, sitting on the other side of the table from you, I can say like I bike all the time in the winter, and that's just because like over like the past 5 years I've just grown more comfortable with it. And so you've got to provide a good like starting point for people, and so that good starting point is just like a cleared path that runs through a neighborhood that connects different locations and destinations. So the city's doing that. It's just like to make it available to more people. You know, it's only available in certain parts of the city right now. To make it available to more people, you build out that network more. You ensure that the snow clearing is working really well. And yeah, I think you just give people like some opportunities to try it out too and like risk it. Cause like when I first started biking during the winter, it was like literally on a road bike. So I was like biking on like ice with like skinny tires, and like it was my dad's old bikes. Yeah, it was dangerous. And like I didn't hurt myself or anything. Like I might have fallen a couple times, but like there was enough bubble wrap built into the system where like it didn't hurt myself. So like, you know, you might get people who are like, oh, I'm going to try it now. And then they hurt themselves or get hurt by like getting in an accident or something. And so then they never actually, you know, become that full rider in the winter. And so, yeah, we've got to make the system safe enough for people so that they can take a little bit of that risk and get more comfortable with it over time, because like that's ultimately what I was able to do. And so we just got to create that experience for more people.
I see. Okay.
I'm glad that you like winter though, because it's like we live in a northern city. There's going to be winter, and I used to hate winter growing up. I was just like, it's cold, my hands get cold. And as I became an adult, I was like, I'm never going to leave this place. So I might as well just find a way to love it. And like now it's just like going for long runs in the winter when the sun is like shining in the sky, even when it like snows on a day like it is today. It's like, oh, that's precipitation. That means that like it reduces the, you know, direness of the drought that we're in. Like it's just trying to find the silver linings in everything that's going on.
I just really like the River Valley.
Yeah.
I think usually if the exams are not too hard, a walk with a hot chocolate, I wouldn't mind the cold. Okay, I said I don't want to make this too political, but I do have the question of how much of political pressures do you think influence the design of cities and the decisions that take place regarding the overall culture that the city is built on?
Yeah, I love this question. Because yeah, it's a spicy question. I think just stewing on it for a second. Like because planning is all about communities. It's all about like how do we plan for a neighborhood to live together. There's inherently politics in that, because politics are people organizing for a certain stance or perspective or vision. And so the politics, I think, very much influences how planning operates, because it determines like what's the window of possibility here. Like, and going back to rules, like the politics will influence what's like the range of feasible outcomes within what's allowed in the land use bylaw. Like the politics is going to influence that. So there are some places where, you know, certain groups might be really well organized and they're like, we only want single family homes. And that's the zeitgeist, and that means that the zoning bylaw is going to be pretty narrow for many communities, and it's going to be only possible to build single family homes.
Is that really possible? So people in a community say we just want single
Yeah, well, and that's how a lot of our cities have been built too.
Wow.
Yeah,
I did
and
not know that.
yeah. And it's like it's a lot different from other places across the world, but like that's a lot of North America is just been built in that way. But like Edmonton has now taken steps where I think there's other groups that have been really well organized that have been like, no, we should be able to build more kinds of housing in our communities, not just single family homes, but like anything up to a couple stories of like apartments and that kind of thing, like 8 units in an apartment on one lot. And so yeah, it's very political because like either people's different visions of the city are contested in what the rules are. And yeah, so there's that. And so like any kind of like local engagement event that's like this development's going in or like we're rebuilding this road, all of that's political because it's it's people have different visions on how it should occur, and so only one of those visions is going to get built and paid for at the end of the day, so it becomes political. And so I think like planning kind of becomes a way to like manage that political nature, like, or those political processes within an overarching like development process of like you have time to have input, you have time to negotiate, you have time to make a final consideration, put it up, and like a city council is making a lot of these decisions too, like of what the land use bylaw is, or if we're going to make a specific change to the land use bylaw, or if we're going to make certain spending decisions within our city. Like it just becomes political because like a local decision maker makes a decision on it. So yeah, it's all very political. I think that's one thing that I've kind of realized the more I've gotten into planning of like, yeah, it is very political. And there's certainly like an art behind it. That doesn't mean that it's like, oh, it's just all influenced by politics. Like there is, I think, like a core of planning that is like, yeah, strong process, strong understanding of best practices, you know, a strong praxis overall, that is then managing like the political discussions that we're having about our communities.
Okay, I see.
Was that the right answer?
Yes. I'm trying to formulate my question now.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about your involvement in student politics later, but do you see this involvement of politics in urban planning as a headache of your job as a future person who's in the field, or are you going to be in the field, by the way? Just
what do you mean?
asking.
The field?
Okay, this is a new question now.
Yeah.
What's the next step for Stephen Raitz?
The next step is I gotta become a lawyer. So
Okay.
that's the
Congrats.
big next step. And like going back to the question that you asked before of like, is the politics a headache? Like the politics
Really?
is basically the people. Like it's just different people. And like I got involved in urban planning because I loved the idea of like community development, like working with a bunch of people to like build something bigger basically. And so yeah, I've gotten involved in all of this because it's all about people, and like people are interesting and fun, and you know sometimes they do silly stuff that I don't agree with, but it's like it's just fascinating to be a part of an arena where a bunch of different people are duking it out over like what happens. So I think it's like all just very inherent in what I'll do, and so I would not be headed in this direction if I didn't like it or wasn't interested in that kind of contestation of like what are the rules, what is the community, yada yada yada. And like ultimately what I'll hopefully be doing like as a lawyer, like the dream is like supporting either like the administration, like the people who listen to city council and implement their vision like through their expertise and professionalism, or it's advising city council like this is what you can and can't do, this is what you can and cannot direct for. And so either way I'll be working with these people, and it's going to be so much fun because it's all just so local. Like it's like everybody, going back to that universality point earlier, it's like everybody connects to this stuff. Everybody like in some part of their day walks along a street or is in a part of their community, and so it's just so lovely. And especially like as things get more and more polarized, to find things to unite over. It just, even if you don't agree over the thing that you're talking about, at least you have that common ground of something to connect over.
I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people on and off the mic who are involved in politics, and to be honest with you, not a lot of people take it not serious as you do. In a way that you're just being silly. Okay, now let's actually talk about the actual real stuff.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. I think it's something that any field needs to take it in a bigger picture. It's really good.
Yeah, like I think it very much comes from my parents of like they had this saying growing up, and I think it's from a movie where it's like like don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's all the small stuff.
Mhm.
Like it's like, you know, there are life and death things that happen in our community every day, and there are bad things that are going to happen to people. There are bad things that are going to happen to me one day, and it's going to suck. But it's like when I like, what's that saying? While we live, while we live, let us live. It's like there's a Latin way of saying it, and it's really fun. But it's like, why would I not try to have fun and try to bring fun for others while we're alive on planet Earth?
Yeah.
Because one day we won't be, and it's like that's gonna suck. I don't know if I believe in the afterlife or not, but yeah, might as well make it fun. And so yeah, there's big decisions that get made through politics, and there's like bad outcomes that happen for people, and it's really tough. But ultimately, you know, you got to push for the best that you can in that moment, and if it doesn't work out, you just keep on trying for something else. And that persistence, like that ability to endure through like wins and losses, is I think made a lot more sustainable if you have fun with it, if you make it a little silly. Yeah, so I don't know, it's worked up to this point, but I'm only 27 years old turning 28, so I could become a grumpy old man one day, who's to say.
Okay. Now let's jump into the University of Alberta a little. You have, for the last year, you've been the representative of the Students' Union at the Board of Governors at the University of Alberta.
Not exactly. I've been the undergrad rep for the Board of Governors. So I've
Undergrad rep,
not, I sit on Student Union Council, but I'm
you're
not
not
actually part of
taking-
the Students'
I
Union.
see, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all part of the Students' Union because we're all undergraduate students, but like I sit on the Board of Governors as just a general undergrad rep. And
Representative from the students.
from the students,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. I see. That
Yeah.
would make more sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's all good.
Okay. How has it been overall?
It's been really good. Like I think I just came into the role with a lot of experience and like knowledge, not knowing everything, of course, but just like came into it with like, you know, had been on campus from 2014 to 2019, had seen a lot of stuff occur, had come back to campus 2021 to 2024, continued to see stuff occur, had been involved all along the way. So like I kind of had a good understanding of like the files that the Board of Governors talks about and like the projects and decisions that they make. So that made, I think, just approaching the role a bit easier and like meant I could get to because a lot of the time, the first time that a lot of people might be in these roles of like student leadership or that kind of thing, it's the first time they're dealing with like really complex decision making in their life. It's not just like writing a diploma exam or a final in high school or like being on a sports team. It's like really complicated. And so a lot of the time people get worn down in these kind of positions because they're like, I just do not have a grapple on what's going on yet. And so I came into the position having a good grasp of stuff. And so the year just really flew by, though. I think that's kind of like the converse of like, oh, I was ready to do stuff, but there was only so much to do because it's just like there's only like, you know, 20 to 30 meetings that I attended overall. And and there was specific things set for a lot of those meetings. So it's like only narrow windows of influence and that kind of thing. So it was kind of fun to be given that problem, like make complicated decisions and be strategic about when you try to like raise student perspectives and concerns, which is like something I, you know, almost always tried to do depending on the situation. And so it was fun to have that like, yeah, kind of like strategic, like, conundrum, like how do I approach this? It was challenging. It was like good to learn through that. And it was also just like fun to meet so many people. Like you get to meet the other governors on the Board of Governors, and they all come from different perspectives and different backgrounds. And so it was interesting to learn from them and see how they viewed the university. It was like really fun to bring that student perspective to them. And it was fun to then like go out from the Board of Governors and be involved in the community overall too. And like hear from students, like here's some of the issues, like here's what I'm facing, and like trying to translate that into the complicated decision making that the Board of Governors does. So it was a fun year, but it was a fast year. Yeah.
Fast. Okay. It's in here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go in a temporal order.
Mm.
Do you think you can provide any background or technically context to the closure of the UofA Sexual Assault Center?
Yeah, so what occurred is I don't have all the details on it, but like a leader within that center signed on to a letter that was like a political letter regarding a specific issue, and a like kind of decision was made by the university to
let that person go because there was kind of conflict between signing onto that letter and the university's kind of perception writ large. And there's a lot of complexity there that I'm not getting into, but I'm just saying that was kind of like the 1, 2, 3. Like that was like signed onto a letter, issue arose, was let go. And I don't even know if that's the right term for it. Like that person no longer works at the university. That's probably the best way for my understanding of how to portray it. And so there were still people working at the sexual assault center, but because they did not have that leader position like fulfilled, they were at reduced capacity. And so they're not providing the same level of service, and they're working to build that back up. And to my understanding, they're doing hiring for that right now or have done hiring. And so there's like the door is closed in some ways because they're only providing online support, or they had only been providing online support, but there's not like a closure in the sense of the other word or the other meaning of the word, where it's like that is not doing anything. It's not meeting the community need. Like we know the community need exists and that something needs to, like these supports need to be available to folks. And so when that capacity gets pulled back, it's really concerning and it needs to be built back up really quick, because we know even if it's at maximum capacity, it's still not satiating the complete need that's out in the community to respond to sexual assaults and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, that's probably like my best way of describing it. And I probably even muddled a couple things in explaining it, but yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, now let's talk about your favorite topic, the tuition.
Yeah.
So, first of all, let's go for a context. Let's go for a quick context. Why is the tuition increasing every year at UofA?
Yeah, so we go back to history, and Alberta is a pretty unique tuition context because, let's go back to the Constitution. Let's go back to the rules that we all agree to. Like, post-secondary institutions are kind of creatures of the province. They're things that are set, and they're institutions that are funded and kind of governed by different provinces. And so Alberta, over the past 150 years, has had a specific approach to universities that's different from other provinces. And so what Alberta has had for a lot of its time is a pretty low tuition environment. So instead of having higher tuition, even before we get to tuition, we got to talk about like, how does a university operate? It gets money from the province and it gets money from students who attend that university. So the money from the province just pays for like the operation of the university, not even explicitly the operation, but it just is revenue for the university to use. And the tuition is also revenue for the university to use. And now the system that Alberta has used over like a long period of time has been like a pretty low tuition jurisdiction. Like the province is footing more of the bill for universities across Alberta. And that's the way that things have been done. And that's because we've been a very wealthy province. We've been able to afford this kind of thing. And that's just like a certain decision that's been made by the province over successive generations. And just to go back a second, like provinces fund universities because universities provide a public good. They educate people. They get people ready for the workforce. They get people ready to invest and like be involved in their community. They help create knowledge and like cure cancer and like all this shit. So like, it's like universities are really important. We should generally fund that kind of stuff because it has all these spurious positive benefits for society. However, like tuition also plays a role too, because it's like individual students reap a benefit for receiving that education. And so having like a sticker price on that is like just part of the deal, I guess. Like there are places where there's free tuition and it's just like the province would be funding us 100%. We don't exist in that right now. I don't think we have a government that would push for that kind of thing, and I don't even think there'd be other political parties that would push for that kind of thing. So we're kind of in this place where it's like there's going to be money coming from the province and money coming from students. And yes, Alberta has been low tuition, and now we're shifting to province is going to pull back some of their funding commitments. They're going to fund the university less. And so tuition is going to have to pay for more of that operation of the university. If you want to keep the university the same size, like not even make the university better, but just keep it the same size and like keep it doing the things. Yeah, maintain it. Because if there's less money coming from over here, there's more money that needs to come from over here. And so the increases have been going up over recent years because we've had a change of government who is heading in that direction of pulling back their funding because they just see it as more of like an individual good. I guess that would be my guess at like why they would frame it in that way. And so, yeah, we're just like, unless we want to like
not, unless we want the university to shrink, tuition is going to have to go up. And it's kind of like picking between your favorite kid of like, if we're going to shrink, then we're going to have to get rid of stuff. And it's like, oh, then you're making really difficult decisions.
You're going to reduce the quality of education.
Well, yeah,
somehow.
like it could be like, yeah, getting rid of certain faculties because it's like, well, we can't afford that anymore. Or it could be just like a decrease in quality all across the board, which is like tough because like we want to attract people from elsewhere to come to Alberta to like learn in Edmonton, to learn at the University of Alberta. We want to provide like a really good like in your backyard experience for students from around here. So it's very much like a rat race to be like a good university, to continually improve the experience that like students, professors can have in like learning and developing knowledge. So yeah, it's all got to head in one direction because we have a province that's headed in one direction.
Okay. And
that's my personal take.
I see, got you. Okay. Is there any way the university can manage? Because I'm sure university. Okay, I see the university, any university technically, as a big company that is providing a service to its consumers, which are students, and in return, it has merch, for example. It has some signing power of some advertising deals, for example, and those things. So overall, I don't, personally, in my view, I don't think the only source of revenue for the university, any university, is either the tuition of the students or the financial aid that comes from the government. So do you think the University of Alberta can explore other avenues of revenue to hopefully make up for this budget cut?
Yes, I've really boiled it down, like in my earlier explanation, and the university is already doing some of that kind of stuff. So the university is like an institution, owns land, and they're trying to develop some of that land so that they can make money off of it, basically. Like there's certain like agricultural surplus lands that are within the university that are now being turned into neighborhoods, that when people live in those neighborhoods and pay to live in those neighborhoods, that's a revenue stream. There's also like investments that the university makes that over time, hopefully those investments accrue revenue and that kind of thing, like make more money over time. And so that's another place. Like the university is like doing this stuff actively to try to pull funding from other sources. Like they charge for parking. Like there's all this stuff that they do. And like that helps, but it's like the change in direction from the province of like how post-secondary institutions are going to be funded in Alberta is like in some ways cataclysmic. Like it's a big change, and so it's going to be a very painful change because any change kind of comes with like, oh, it's uncomfortable. This is like a big change, and it's like going from like instead of 60% funded by the province, it's going to like 40%. And so when you have an institution that got a budget of like $500 million, that's $200 million gone. And you cannot make $200 million off of merchandise or developing land or all this kind of stuff. So you're going to be able to stem the bleeding a little bit or like help in small ways, but it's because it's such big changes on one end, it necessitates big changes on other ends. And so, yeah, like, and so ultimately we can squabble and be angry about the university making specific decisions around tuition, but it's like universities are creatures of the province, and so like if we don't want those kind of things to be happening at the university, we need to communicate that to the provincial government, and we need to maybe elect different provincial governments if that government is not going to listen to us and our concerns about things changing. I think like we're with this provincial government for the next 4 years, and so I think we're very much headed in a specific direction, and I think what's important moving forward is that realize the table stakes. Tuition is going to have to go up to meet the moment of funding being pulled back from the province. Like we're going to be able to make money in all these other areas too, hopefully, but tuition is just going to also have to increase. And so the important thing that the university can do, and ultimately the province can do, is like help the people who are going to fall through the cracks when tuition goes up markedly each and every year. Like ensure that people are not going to the food bank because they're starving, or like ensure that people aren't ending their degrees early because they can no longer afford it. Like providing financial aid for
that likely in a province as wealthy as Alberta, like that minority of people on campus who are becoming even poorer because of getting a post-secondary education, like helping out those folks while ensuring that a lot of the other like wealthy folks who come to our province just are able to pay for their tuition like outright.
I see.
Yeah. So not a happy news story, not not sunshine and rainbows, but that is the way of the world. Yeah, as we exist in it.
Okay, and where does in this kind of university shenanigan, administrative shenanigan, comes students protesting, and why should the students even bother when there is w- when this is happening and we can't do anything about it?
Yeah, well, I always think about like Alberta in comparison to Quebec and like how organized students are in Quebec. And so you know that at least in the Canadian context, like there are other places where when students scream and shout, the provincial government listens. And it just depends on how loud that screaming and shouting is. And I think in Alberta, we kind of have this history of like, we've just been lucky to have low tuition for so long. Like, I think there's been good student advocacy over years to like, you know, maintain that in some ways, but we've also just been a wealthy province that's been able to afford having lower tuition because the province can pay for the university's operation more. And so we're not necessarily as like sharp or well versed in like protesting or being angry, but yeah,
It's
if we
not in the culture of the students.
yeah. So I think it's gotta like it's kind of like as the temperature increases, people will acclimatize and realize like, oh, we do actually need to scream and shout about this because things are going to get tougher. And that culture takes a long time to develop. I think I've seen that culture like evolve and like the student leaders who get evolved from like when I think back to 2014 to 2024, like I've seen that evolve over time. It's not linear, it's not all one way, but it's definitely growing. And so yeah, I think like students could not, but it's like it's just going to be even worse then. So do you want something that's terrible or something that's less bad? Less bad. That's what I would say. And so less bad just takes a little bit of effort of like showing up and shouting from time to time, because ultimately like it goes back to what I just said about like you got to communicate that to the provincial government that like you can't do this. And ultimately like for domestic students at least, you know, we have a 2% tuition cap right now. That's something this provincial government did. They listened to concerns and they did something. It's not for all students. It doesn't help out everybody, but it helps out some people because some people stood up and said something. So yeah, it just shows that even if with this particular provincial government, it's not like they're going to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so long as you come to them with proposals or asks, they'll consider it and sometimes they implement it. So yeah, I think it's worth standing up and shouting. And when there's elections, like consider your two options and see which one's is better. Talk to both of those parties and say like, what are you going to do for me as a student? There's always this like timeline difficulty, I think, with being a student because we have elections every 4 years. You're a student for 4 years, so it's kind of difficult to.
It's once in a lifetime.
Yeah. You like it's difficult to be a motivated subpopulation for provincial parties to respond to, because you don't exist. Like seniors always exist. Students always exist too, but it's much more ephemeral. You're here and you're gone. So yeah, it just I think requires the advocacy to be sharper and the organization to be even more. You know, fast and ready to rumble. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now I think we are in the same page about the question I'm gonna ask now. I know that student politics is similar to actual politics, and there is a beautiful dance of power between the students and the administration of the university, and it's. You can't just be like, oh no, do this, or otherwise I'll grab the students, we'll protest in the morning. Because relationships have been established, trust has been established, right? At the same time, I think, this is not a roast to the student union, but I think considering the overall political weather coming from the provincial government and their decision on reducing the budget that they will allocate to post-secondary educations, it was quite obvious that this year we are going to have another wave of tuition hikes. So why didn't the student union, more specifically just as the main student body, provide a more centralized maybe channel of students protesting maybe in a more organized manner a little bit earlier than just a week before the budget for the University of Alberta is going to be approved by the Board of Governors. So I think these small things are intricate details that, at least to me as an individual student, doesn't seem what's the word? It just seems like, okay, I think we're just too late now. Like we didn't start on time. Next year we should start on time, and then next year there is another team, and this trust has to be established with the provincial government, with the university administration, and same thing technically.
Yeah. Well, I think this year there was stuff done. Like there was a letter writing campaign. Like that's 1,000 letters to the president of the university and
Yes.
the chair of the board of governors and the premier and the minister of advanced education. Like that has an impact. That had an impact. Yeah, I think this year from an organizational perspective, like this is also something that occurs every year, and I think administration is starting to smarten up to this and like understand, because in recent years the engagement for the university budget, it's gone better. Like the people who are vice provosts and provosts and that kind of thing, they're improving that end of things, of at least listening to students, like providing them an opportunity to go to an open house or town hall or fill out a survey. Like that kind of stuff is happening better. But what occurs is that happens between October to January, and we don't know what the provincial budget is at that point. So we're actually not sure what the exact numbers are going to be, and it's a long period of time when lots of factors are at play, and so we're not really sure what the province is going to do. They could do this, they could do that. We'll consider your feedback. It kind of depends on like XYZ factor. And then the provincial budget comes at the end of February, and then the university passes their budget at the end of March. And so there's a tighter timeline between, or like after all this engagement occurred, when we actually have the numbers where we could be more specific or methodical about like proposals. It's a much tighter timeline, and a lot of things already get baked in. And so I think in future years, they're going to do that engagement well, but they're also going to listen to like student perspectives on like what specific forms of financial aid should we be trying to focus more on to ensure that students don't fall through the cracks. Like they'll be more open to that instead of just open to like apple pie statements about like what you think about tuition. And in that specificity, I think there's more solutions that come out of it and more specific things that people can advocate for, because I don't really think we had some specific things to advocate for going into this budget, but we didn't have time to like develop that with students or bring students along for the journey to like ask for those things. And so then people might have been like, well, what are we asking for? Like tuition is just going up again, like blah, blah, blah. When I think we have a whole year of doing that as a collective and working with the university, I think we have a better chance of like implementing improvements. There was another aspect of this that I was thinking about. Also got to recognize the context of like this year for domestic students, like tuition was only going up 2% as opposed to 5%. So there's just that like dollars and cents component that is less stressful, or feels less stressful for folks. So people feel like they don't have to scream and shout because it's like, well, it's only 2% this year. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the 2% cap and the different technically tuition models that the domestic students have and international students have.
Yep.
Based on my understanding, let's say I'm an international student who got enrolled in UofA in 2023. I will be given a guaranteed tuition for the full 4 years. Let's say it's $30,000, and every year I'll just pay that.
Yep.
Meanwhile, another international student who gets admitted in 2024, then that tuition will be increased. So that's the tuition model for international students, cohort based. If I'm okay,
Yeah, you're 100%
but
correct.
The tuition model for domestic students is different.
Yep.
How's that?
It's determined year over year.
Okay, so
Yep.
So the 2% cap means that every year the university is allowed to increase the tuition by 2%, not more than that.
Not more than that.
Okay.
And they could choose to increase it by 1% as well. Like it's just the ceiling. You can't go any higher than this. But based on how things are going, how our conversation has been, discussing the problems of the world, it's going to be 2% because they need to like max that out basically. Yeah.
And how was the overall organizational process of having that approved? What's it called? Dance of powers.
Well, I think the sequence is the province releases their budget, the university understands how much money they're getting from the province, then they do the math of like, okay, well, what's our operational cost? Like, what's our operational cost for all these different faculties? What's the tuition that we are allowed to impose on folks? What do we need to recoup to actually run what we are proposing to run next year? And then that proposal gets baked and determined, and then it's brought to the Board of Governors. And so then it's like the dance of powers, like the discussions is like reaching out to different Board of Governors members and being like, hey, students have these concerns, here are some of the proposals that we've been thinking about, trying to get them to push the university to do that more. Like, the list of proposals too was also shared from the Students' Union to the university already, so it's like, the university knows what we want, we're trying to get other decision makers to say, yeah, we should do those things, and I don't know if that was communicated quickly enough this year, potentially, or like, I think we're learning how to, in an environment where tuition is going to be going up and there's some people that are going to need more help, we're still trying to figure out how to create those specific solutions instead of just like a broad like tuition freeze or like being against exceptional tuition increases. Like, it's instead of being against stuff every year, it's like, how do we actually figure out how to create stuff? And I think this is one of the first years where we're like really creating a suite of options for the university to implement, and I think we're still learning how to do that, as opposed to just being against stuff. Yeah, so that's why it might not have happened as fast as it could in future years, but I don't know. I think that's better in future years because like that's ultimately the direction that we're going to be headed in. Like, it's a harder sell to like be against things going forward when the situation we're headed in is like, it's a rock and a hard place. Like, we're headed in a direction where certain decisions have to get made.
Got it. Okay. As my last point, I wanna touch on something pretty simple. So the university released their action plan last October, I think, and they're planning to increase the number of students that will get enrolled by 10,000, if I'm not mistaken. Meanwhile, there is a housing crisis in Alberta and to some extent in Canada in general. So how is the process of the university and the municipal government communicating the fact that, hey, buddy, we don't have enough houses to put all of the students in?
Yes. So wait, between the conversation between the provincial government and the university?
No, municipal government.
Municipal.
So
Okay,
Edmonton,
perfect.
for example.
Yeah.
Because I think if that's communicated, there will be a higher quality of decisions to be made instead of the government of Alberta talking to the University of Alberta. So.
I am so ready to answer this question. And ultimately, the city is pretty well adjusted to respond to this change, I think. Like I was mentioning earlier, the city has like rewritten its land use bylaw, which is like the rules of how we build the city. And those rules have been revised so that it's easier to build more housing for more people in more places. And so, yeah, if we're going to take on, I think we're going from like 44, 45 to 60,000, so 15,000 students in the next like decade, little less than a decade. And so, yeah, it means there's going to be a demand for housing, and we've written the rules so that the supply can increase around the university. Like you see, there's tons of towers that have gone up around the university recently, and not all of that is going to be for a normal undergrad student, but that means that there's, more housing for professors or more housing for graduate students. More supply, and so that the demand also will move around within that supply. So we might have people living in apartments right now where they're like going to be able to move into newer, more expensive apartments, and the apartments they move out of will be apartments that students can move into. So there'll be kind of like people moving around the community too. I don't think it's perfect. Like, I think there's a world where, rent continues to increase, like tuition continues to increase. But compared to other jurisdictions across Canada where there are real crises occurring, we're probably best adjusted because we've rewritten the rules to accept more people coming into our community. And yeah, the city literally has like a broader, not just like the rule book for the city building, but we also have like a broader vision statement of like, here's the kind of community that we want to build and exist within. And that's all about like, how do we grow to 2 million people over time? And so we're planning to welcome like 1 million more people. And so 15,000 people being a component of that is already kind of like imputed over within like the overall, vision we have for the city. So I think we're doing good. I think there can always be more, communication between the municipality and the university, and I think it will become more commonplace for that to occur because things will get tougher for Edmonton in future years, and things will get tougher in Alberta over future years. Like, we will not always be the wealthy place that we have been, so when times get tough, then we need to find ways to work together, rely on each other's support, work in concert to push for change. Like, I think a lot of the time when the big initial cuts happened to the University of Alberta, like, people just hadn't experienced that in Edmonton and hadn't like realized what the knock-on effects of that were going to be for the city of Edmonton, for the Edmonton metropolitan region. Like, we just didn't realize what was going to happen because it never happened before. Now that that has happened, and it will likely happen again in some ways, people will be more motivated to respond and work with one another. So I think the communication channels will like be strengthened. So yeah, I have faith. I think we've got a good plan in place. We've got a good framework. We got a good council. We'll probably continue to have a good council so long as students are organized leading into the next municipal election. So that's that like influence part of like students should scream and shout about stuff, and that's an opportunity to have influence to ensure that the housing situation that exists around campus and across the city writ large continues to be as positive as possible. That's what I think, at least, though. Yeah.
No, I see where you're coming from. I see. Okay. Yeah, that's technically all of my questions.
Sweet.
Thank you very, very much for this conversation. I really appreciate it. I congratulate you on finishing law school. It's a long process.
Yeah. It's a fun process, though. People love to bitch and complain about it, but it's been such a hoot and just been so lovely to be back on campus. So it's so great to have been on this podcast,
thank you.
It's great that you do this work in like stitching different parts of campus together. I think it's awesome. So yeah, I'd love to be a part of it. Love to be a part of it.
And I just wanted to thank you from the behalf of all the students. You did amazing as the Board of Governor representative. This year you made the most boring things very, very entertaining, and just an absolute bundle of energy to just watch and be like, this is great, this is amazing, I can watch this for the day.
That was literally my goal, so check mark. Mission accomplished.
Awesome.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't get tuition to go down 500%, but at least we had fun.
No, that's... as a member of the University of Alberta, I am very glad that you were the Board of Governor representative this year.
Well, and I think we can be glad about next year. We'll have Adrian in that position and Lisa in the Students Union President position. So I think we're got good things coming in store still too.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens from a distance next year.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much, man. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Amirali Bigleri Podcast. Now, I'd like to finish this episode by a quote from Walt Disney. Whatever you do it well. Do it so well that when people see you do it, they will want to come back and see you do it again. And they will want to bring others and show them how well you do what you do.